It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when Microsoft seemed completely untouchable. The company had built one of the most powerful monopolies in the history of technology, with Windows running on nearly every personal computer across the globe. Businesses depended on it, governments relied on it, and everyday users rarely questioned it. Software in that era was something you bought, something you installed from a disk, something owned and controlled by corporations. And at the center of that world stood Microsoft, confident, dominant, and largely unchallenged. But while Microsoft was busy consolidating its empire, something very different was quietly gaining momentum in the background, something that didn't follow the traditional rules of business or control. That something was Linux, and its rise would eventually force Microsoft into one of the most unexpected transformations in tech history. Linux didn't begin as a corporate project. It wasn't backed by venture capital or driven by profit motives. It started as a personal experiment by Linus Torvalds in the early 1990s, when he set out to create a free operating system kernel that anyone could use and modify. What made Linux revolutionary wasn't just its technical design but the philosophy behind it. It embraced the principles of open source, meaning the code was available to anyone who wanted to study it, improve it, or build upon it. This idea stood in stark contrast to the proprietary model that companies like Microsoft had perfected. In the beginning, Linux was far from user-friendly. It required command-line knowledge, patience, and the willingness to experiment. For most people, it simply wasn't practical. Meanwhile, Microsoft Windows offered a polished graphical interface, extensive software compatibility, and widespread support. The choice for the average user was obvious. Linux remained in the shadows, embraced mainly by programmers, hobbyists, and a small but passionate community of developers who believed in its potential. But beneath that quiet surface, Linux had something incredibly powerful working in its favor. Because it was open, it attracted contributions from people all over the world. Developers could fix bugs, add features, and adapt the system to their specific needs. This created a kind of organic evolution that no single company could replicate. Instead of relying on a centralized team, Linux grew through collaboration shaped by thousands of minds working together. As the internet began to expand in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Linux found its first major opportunity. Servers, unlike personal computers, didn't need flashy interfaces. They needed stability, security, and efficiency. Linux excelled in all of these areas. It could run for long periods without crashing, it was less vulnerable to certain types of attacks, and it could be customized to fit a wide range of use cases. Companies started to notice. Slowly but surely, Linux began to power more and more of the internet's infrastructure. Web hosting companies adopted Linux because it was cost-effective and reliable. Startups used it because they didn't have to pay licensing fees. Large organizations embraced it because they could control every aspect of their systems. Over time, Linux became the backbone of the web. Many of the websites and services people used every day were running on Linux servers, even if users had no idea. During this period, Microsoft remained focused on its strengths. It continued to dominate the desktop market and expanded into enterprise solutions with products like Windows Server and its suite of business software. The company was aware of Linux, but it didn't see it as an immediate threat. In fact, there were moments when Microsoft openly criticized open source, questioning its reliability and sustainability. The idea that a community-driven project could compete with a corporate giant seemed unlikely. However, the dynamics of the tech industry were beginning to change. The rise of the internet shifted the center of gravity away from desktop computing and toward online services. Suddenly, what mattered wasn't just the operating system on a single machine, but the infrastructure powering entire networks of machines. Linux was perfectly positioned for this new world. Then came the next major shift: cloud computing. Companies no longer wanted to manage their own servers. They wanted scalable, on-demand infrastructure that could grow with their needs. This gave rise to cloud platforms like Amazon Web Services and later Microsoft Azure, and once again, Linux was at the heart of it all. Developers building cloud applications preferred Linux environments. Many of the tools they used were designed for Linux. The flexibility of the platform made it easier to deploy and manage applications at scale. As cloud adoption grew, so did the influence of Linux. It wasn't just powering individual servers anymore. It was powering entire ecosystems. Microsoft found itself at a crossroads. Its traditional business model, built around licensing Windows, didn't translate perfectly to the cloud era. Customers wanted flexibility. They wanted to run different operating systems, use different programming languages, and integrate with a wide range of tools. Many of those tools were rooted in the open source world. At first, Microsoft tried to push Windows as the primary platform for Azure, but customers had other plans. They were already invested in Linux, and they weren't willing to abandon it. If Microsoft wanted to compete in the cloud, it had to meet customers where they were. That meant embracing Linux, whether it liked it or not. What followed was one of the most remarkable shifts in corporate strategy ever seen in the tech industry. Microsoft didn't just start supporting Linux, it began actively promoting it. Azure added extensive support for Linux distributions, making it easy for customers to deploy and manage Linux-based workloads. Over time, Linux usage on Azure grew rapidly, eventually surpassing Windows in certain areas. This wasn't just about business pragmatism. It reflected a deeper change in how Microsoft viewed the world. Under the leadership of Satya Nadella, the company adopted a more open and collaborative approach. Nadella famously stated that Microsoft loved Linux, a statement that would have been unthinkable in earlier years. But it wasn't just talk. Microsoft began contributing to open source projects, releasing its own tools as open source, and engaging with the developer community in new ways. One of the most significant moves was the introduction of the Windows subsystem for Linux. This feature allowed developers to run Linux environments directly within Windows, combining the best of both worlds. It acknowledged a reality that had become impossible to ignore. Developers wanted Linux. Instead of forcing them to choose, Microsoft made it easier to use both. The rise of containers further accelerated Linux's dominance. Technologies like Docker made it possible to package applications in lightweight, portable units that could run consistently across different environments. Containers rely heavily on Linux features, making Linux the natural choice for modern application development. Kubernetes, the leading platform for managing containers, also runs on Linux, reinforcing its central role in the ecosystem. At the same time, Linux was expanding far beyond servers and the cloud. The launch of Android, based on the Linux kernel, brought Linux to billions of smartphones around the world. Suddenly, Linux wasn't just something running in data centers. It was in people's pockets. It powered smart TVs, embedded systems, and a growing range of connected devices. The Internet of Things added yet another dimension to Linux's growth. From smart home devices to industrial machinery, Linux became the operating system of choice for many embedded systems. Its flexibility and efficiency made it ideal for devices with limited resources. As the number of connected devices exploded, Linux's presence became even more pervasive. All of these trends contributed to a larger shift in the software industry. Open source was no longer a fringe movement. It had become the dominant model for innovation. Companies realized that collaborating on shared foundations allowed them to move faster and reduce costs. Instead of reinventing the wheel, they could build on existing open-source projects and focus on adding value in other areas. Microsoft's journey reflects this broader transformation. The company that once saw open source as a threat now relies on it in many ways. It has become one of the largest contributors to open-source projects, and its tools and platforms are deeply integrated with the open-source ecosystem. The acquisition of GitHub further cemented its role in this new landscape, giving it a central position in the global developer community. But the story isn't just about Microsoft adapting to Linux, it's about how the entire concept of software power shifted. Control used to mean owning the code, locking it down, and charging for access. Now, influence often comes from participation, contribution, and community engagement. Linux exemplifies this shift. It doesn't belong to a single company, yet it powers some of the largest companies in the world. The comeback of Linux, if it can even be called that, wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow, steady rise driven by practical advantages and a strong philosophical foundation. It succeeded not because it defeated Microsoft directly, but because it aligned with the direction technology was already heading. For Microsoft, the shock wasn't just that Linux became successful. It was that the rules of the game had changed. The company had to evolve, to let go of old assumptions, and to embrace a future where openness and collaboration were key. In doing so, it not only survived but found new ways to thrive. Today, the lines between proprietary and open-source software are more blurred than ever. Developers use a mix of tools from different ecosystems. Companies contribute to projects that their competitors also use. Innovation happens in public repositories as much as in corporate labs. And at the center of this interconnected world is Linux, quietly powering much of the technology we depend on every day. This story is still unfolding. New technologies will emerge, new challenges will arise, and the balance of power will continue to shift. But one thing is clear: the rise of Linux and open source has fundamentally changed the trajectory of the tech industry. It has shown that collaboration can scale, that communities can compete with corporations, and that sometimes the most disruptive ideas come from the most unexpected places. And perhaps the most surprising part of all is that Microsoft, once the fiercest opponent of this movement, is now one of its key participants. Not because it had to surrender, but because it chose to evolve. That decision didn't just reshape the company. It helped define the modern era of computing, where openness isn't a weakness, but a strength, and where the future is built not by one, but by many.